I can.
Okay, good, good. All right. So we got Tim Miller on here, folks. South Africa, Winnipeg. We got people from all over the place. This is amazing. 582 people online right now. And
Wow.
just to give you all, before we get started, I want to give you a quick update on the kids over here next door. We found out that there were 47 children. I told you that yesterday. That are staying in this hotel across from us. And we started out, we were going to buy them some candy. And then yesterday, everybody decided to pile on, and we raised over $2,000 for
Wow.
for these kids. So I think we're going to buy them all a motor scooter or something. I don't know. It's the rate we're going. Um, so Connie's full-time job for the next little while is to go shopping and make little boxes for all these kids. So that's because of you guys, and we appreciate it very much. These kids are going to have a great Hanukkah because of you. They're bored stiff with this little tiny parking lot out here behind me to play in, and they're stuck in a hotel room for the last couple of months while there are rocket barrages overhead. That's exciting. So we're gonna make those kids happy, and that's fun. So thank you very much. I appreciate you doing that. Pam Dolson says, such a hardship, Connie, to go shopping. Ashanti is from Spain. We got people from all over the world on, and that is really cool. So we're going to be talking today about the Hamas threat and their threat in the United States. And not only that, I brought my friend Tim on here because he's a former Secret Service agent and a former police officer and a former, well, not a former Marine. You're never a former Marine. You're just a.
That's right.
Still a Marine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once a Marine, always
Once
a
a Marine. There you go.
That's right.
We're
Okay,
getting it right.
So he's still a Marine and let's see, federal agent and all sorts of other cool stuff. Also, is the CEO of Lionheart Security Services in
Lionheart International Services Group. So,
International Services Group.
They're cloning
that encompasses all of them. Okay.
That's right.
Lionheart International Services Group, which is actually one of the actual top tier training and security. They do consulting and all sorts of things all around the world, and programs and facilities security for schools and companies and all sorts of things. So he's a busy guy. We caught up with you. Where are you now, Jim?
I'm back in Florida. I was in Chicago and LA last week, so I'm hoping to keep planes away from me for a few weeks during the holidays. But we'll see.
Nice. I bet it was the airport an absolute madhouse.
Yeah. Flying's hard now, it's just amazing. But fortunately, no delays, no cancellations. So I'm thankful.
That's good. It seems to me like the airlines have a committee of people whose job it is to make travel more excruciating as much as possible. Like, how can we make this stupider? Let's see. And they're very good at their job. You got to be good at something, and making you miserable is what the airlines are good at. And so, good on them. Okay, so let's talk about what happened here in Jerusalem just a few days ago. A really unfortunate story from start to finish. There was a shooting that took place a couple miles down the road from where I'm standing, and these Hamas operatives, two brothers out of the West Bank, who had recently been, one of which had been recently released from prison for planning a terror attack after 10 years, got out of a car with a pistol and an AR-15 and opened fire on a bus stop and proceeded to kill three people. And there was actually four people who died, besides the gunmen who were then killed by a couple of off-duty IDF soldiers who were home on leave, and a concealed carrier who also responded. And that's where the real unfortunate part of this story comes in, because we found out today that concealed carrier was himself killed by the IDF soldiers who mistook him for one of the terrorists. So that was a blue-on-blue incident there. And I mean, that's always that's a real risk. If you're going to conceal carry, if you do find yourself responding to some sort of deadly threat, that you could be taken as the deadly threat by the responding officers and taken out yourself. Let's talk about that a little bit, Tim. How does one approach that sort of incident? How would you break down what happened?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Chuck, as we've talked many times, in the middle of those, quarter second decisions that you must make, you rise or fall to the level of your training.
Mhm.
And I wish I could say it only happens to concealed carriers, but it happens to law enforcement officers. And here's why: when you get into an actual event, you begin to focus. We call it tunnel vision on what is happening with the shooter and how you're going to respond to that appropriately. The problem is you're not considering a situational environment where other folks coming in can misidentify you. And so that's exactly what happened here, because I got to tell you, my experience is when you go into an armed encounter, you're focused on people with guns. And when people have guns exposed, you naturally assume, again, you're under incredible stress, that they're the bad guys. And so, how do we deal with that? Well, in Jerusalem, as we all know, there are a large number of people that are, armed and prepared, IDF folks. And so, in an environment like that, for a concealed carrier, I would be very concerned with exposing my weapon. Um, uh, but it's a catch 22. On the one hand, you're trying to put bad guys down that are actively killing people, but on the other hand, you're trying not to be shot by the law enforcement authorities. And there are tools out there. They make bands you can throw over, yourself to identify yourself. To police. And but the real issue is being trained ahead of time, thinking through how would I respond, because you have to assume, and that's in the US as well, that there could be another concealed carrier there could be plainclothes law enforcement, but then there
Hmm.
could be uniform law enforcement. One of
Hmm.
the things we train people is, when you're first making those 911 calls, tell them what you look like. If you're married, you have a spouse, call the police, tell them what I look like, tell them where I am, because then
Tell
at
them what I'm
least
wearing and all that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because at least at that point, you're planting in the officers' minds, the response officers, that, hey, there could be friendlies there that
Hmm.
we have to concern. So this is a tragedy. Here a person, concealed carrier, is willing to lay down his life to protect others, and ends up losing his life.
Yeah.
And a lot of it goes to training, how
Yeah.
you
Well, this is
train
one
in
of those things
advance,
that is always a possibility, like you say, but I don't
right?
think I would want that to stop me from concealed carrying. I feel like
No,
myself uh, as a trained firearms carrier, and
right.
a man in my society, it's part of my job to form that wall of defense around my society to help the place be a safe, tranquil, peaceful environment. And if it becomes violent, it's my job to respond and run toward the guns and not away from them. Now,
That's
um,
right.
so you talked a little bit about there are devices or things that you could carry along with your everyday carry that would help to identify you as a good guy in a situation like that. What kind of things are you talking about?
So there are sashes you can buy. I think it's a company out of Las Vegas that it's a little clip on your belt. It's like a parachute material, and you literally pull that out and you throw it over. So at least, but let me say this. Even with that said, the police that are coming in hot, they have one objective. That's to kill the shooter that's killing people.
Hmm.
And it just because you have that, is it a wise thing to do? Absolutely. I think it's called DSM products, but you still should be considering things like calling 911, making sure that you have a covered position, because you may be defending yourself from friendly rounds, as we saw in
Right,
this case. But it
right.
is important. And just a reminder, Chuck, I know you and I talk about this all the time. 90% of your response in those quarter seconds is mental. And so
Mhm.
if you're not prepared in advance, if you haven't trained repetitions, if you haven't thought wherever you are, I better get to cover. In this case, there were rifles against pistols. Well, that's not necessarily a good match, you know.
Right.
So those are the things. Hey, if and I agree with you, you're a hero. You're going to run to protect others. I hope and pray I would do the same thing. But we probably ought to be thinking about cover if there's a rifle because
Yeah.
you don't necessarily think about a rifle versus a pistol, but that's a lose lose,
Wow.
and that's what happened in this one.
Yeah, it was, and it all happened so fast. You can see it on the video when you watch the video that I don't think this guy had a chance to get to cover, had a chance to do
Yeah,
anything. But he could have perhaps seen that there were two other people that were already responding and could have just kind of stepped out, right? But
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
split second decision. It'd be really really hard to do that when you're watching these two guys gun down innocents in the street. And I think this might just have to be chalked up to just one of those really unfortunate circumstances. However, it's not that we can't learn anything from it. And,
yeah.
the fact that these sorts of things happen in the United States all the time, and they happen even more often than we know. There's a website I was looking at today that lists a number of shootings out there, and they're far more than what you hear in the news because they've just become ordinary in our country, and most of them are gang related or drug related that would classify as a mass shooting. That's what three or more people shot,
Right.
and they're not just some wacko that goes into a post office and starts gunning people down for no reason. They're mostly gang related, but without a doubt, uh, America is becoming more and more dangerous when it comes
Hmm.
to gun violence, and we have two choices. We can try to uh, convince ourselves that by becoming more vulnerable, that is disarming everything, we can be safer, or we can try to train ourselves to be more prepared to respond correctly in a situation like that. Correct?
And Chuck, that's such sage advice because the number one rule of not just armed conflicts. You know this from your military and your conflicts there is situational awareness.
Mhm.
That is a trained skill. And even in a crisis, if you've trained yourself to see, hey, there are other people armed here,
Mhm.
because in those quarter seconds, you've already trained through incidents in your mind and you're prepared to say, hey, whoa, wait a minute here. In those quarter seconds, I've trained this 100 times in my mind. I may wait and see, because if I'm seeing, armed response coming in, it may be best for me to sit it out. The
Right.
problem is that we, and this because you've been in the center of our training. When you look physiologically at how your body responds, one of the big problems is you have tunnel vision,
Yeah.
and when you have tunnel vision, the only thing you see is that person. But you and I know from combat situations, the enemy can come from a lot of directions. But
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
that's a trained skill. That's where
Yeah.
I know we're unified. It is time for people to train and prepare, because none of us hope that this will happen. We always pray, when we're training groups, organizations. One of my lines is, hey, I pray you never need this. Wouldn't it be wonderful? You never need this. But I will assure you, if you need it, it will be the most important training day of your life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's one of those things that better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
That's right.
Um, and you are engaged in training people all around the country, and not only that, but you've got your own podcast where you help people understand the mechanics of deadly force incidents. Talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that is frustrating, we do training conferences, we work with a lot of corporations, but you can only talk to a certain number of people. And you realize with this wonderful new thing that we're using right now, you can get information out to masses of people. So that's what we try to do with Lionheart Protection Strategies, is just look at real events that are occurring, some in the US, some not, but really diagnosing. And my hope and prayer is that as we're diagnosing, we're thinking through that people look at those scenarios and go, wow, what would I do if? And let me just give you a training tip. if you begin to, everywhere you go, not in paranoia, but in preparation, say, what would I do if? And that's not just limited to violence. It could be, hey, what would I do if there was a fire? Do you know that a
Mhm.
person that identifies a second exit? We just did a podcast with one of my best friends who's an emergency management manager. If you identify a second exit and there's an explosion in smoke in that area where you are, your chances of surviving go up 80 to 90%. So just a
Yeah, no,
practical thing,
right,
hey, where are the other exits? Because
right.
guess where people are going to go? To the one they came in.
Yeah,
And
I
so
remember
yeah,
listening to back in the. I mean, it was a long time ago. Listening to a book about this subject, and they were saying that some of the tips that people learn. You go and you study people who live in high threat environments. What are the things that they don't do? That one of the things they don't do is like sit next to trash cans because trash cans are
right,
often used to put a bomb in. Things like that.
right.
Um,
Hmm.
and so there are things just part of being aware. Ever since then, I mean, that was 30 years ago. I probably read that. I still am hesitant to sit next to a trash can, um, and we can train ourselves to do that, folks. I would highly recommend that you go to the Lionheart's website and maybe, honey, you can put up the YouTube link for his podcast. Go subscribe to Tim's podcast over there and watch some of the short videos, just the short ones that he does. There was one that you just put out, Tim, that talked about road rage. Had a guy, some cowboy that like got mad at the pizza delivery guy and literally choked him out on the side of the road and then just tossed him on the road. We're seeing more and more of that kind of violence just coming from road rage. What is your strategy or what is your advice when it comes to driving and avoiding getting into those kind of incidents?
Don't do it.
Don't drive.
It's not. No,
Stop
don't
driving.
get
Just walk
involved.
from
Yeah,
now
yeah.
on. So,
It's funny that I recently had a guy who was upset. And of course, I, like all of your viewers, I'm a perfect driver. I wish that were true, but you got into a situation, and we were merging, and he got angry, and I'm prepared to do what I have to do. But it's funny what a smile and a wave. Hey, I'm sorry. You know, because the best thing you can do in a road rage situation is not be in a road rage situation. I refer to a mom. I think it was about 18 months ago in the California area, was taking her kid to school, got into a lane dispute. I guess she flipped off the driver. Driver pulled in behind her, fired one round into her car, and struck her child. And the last words of her child was, "Ow, mommy, it hurts," all over a lane. So my advice always, give up the lane, not your life. It
yeah.
is not worth it. Now, if it's a carjacking, we talk about that too. That's different. You've got to take proactive and instant action. I always encourage people
Mhm.
not to be in the center lane, be on the left lane or a right lane, and think through, what would I do if I was approached? Because those are happening more and more. Well, if you got to drive up on a sidewalk to get away from a carjacking, that may be the only option that you have right there. So, and
That's
I
right.
hear you've got police responding there.
Oh,
So I hope
always,
you're not going to get
always. It's
arrested.
it's an ambulance. They're always there
Hmm.
must be a hospital right down the road over here because they're always going by here, almost as
Yeah.
often as the guy backs up with his. He's not there, so I'm sure he'll show up here pretty quick. His large van he backs up for about 10 minutes. It's become like a running joke. Like, oh, there's the backup guy, and we just sit here and listen and go beep 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 beep, and that's the only thing that's gotten me close to road rage since I've been here. I've learned something from living in Panama. You know, uh,
Yeah.
in Panama, if you want to stay alive on the road, you have to drive like you're trying to get arrested. And so there's no real rules per se. It's just you got to do whatever you have to do to get where you're going. And if that
Hmm.
means cutting people off, if that means making a lane where there isn't one, or going in the emergency lane, people just do whatever. And because there's not a lot of enforcement of any of the rules, and so at first it's kind of terrifying to drive there when you come there from the United States. But now, having been down there more than 10 years, it's like, oh, this is the new rules of the game, and I will
Hmm.
play by these rules and I will win. And So I'm used to that. But one of the things you don't see in Panama is a lot of road rage, and it's really interesting because people drive like idiots and will always be cutting people off. And the most you'll ever see is somebody will go like, "Oh," and that's it. And I think
Yeah.
I've learned that everybody's just trying to get where they're going, and
Yeah.
if you allow yourself to feel like you're commiserating with these people. Like we're all just trying to get home. And so if
Hmm.
somebody cuts me off, I'm not gonna honk and get angry and start zooming around or anything. I'm just gonna smile at them. If they get mad at me because I cut them off, well, I'm just gonna smile and go, sorry, hey, sorry, and just be humble about it. I think
Right. That's
pride
right.
is what gets people in trouble when it comes to road rage. Pride and anger and you know part of being showing the love of Christ is not allowing little petty things about life to get me
So
angry,
true.
and showing the peace that passes all understanding in my everyday life. Especially, it's easy to do when nothing's going wrong, but when somebody cuts
That's
you off
right.
in traffic is when it gets hard. So let's talk about
Yeah.
let's move on now, and we'll talk about Hamas and the actual
Yeah.
terror threat in the United States. Now, there's a document that came out recently, I believe. It's a PDF document called the Hamas Network in America. And it was
Hmm.
put out by Georgetown University. Very
Hmm.
comprehensive document. And it just
Hmm.
kind of goes down the list and explains that Hamas supporters have been in the United States active and organized since the 1980s. That organized, that network was formalized in 1988 with the creation of the Palestine Committee. They created several organizations across the United States in places like Chicago and Dallas and Washington, D.C. Some of the key organizations include the Islamic Association for Palestine, the Occupied Land Fund, which later changed its name to the Holy Land Fund. And think how tricky that is, right? Hey, give to the
Right.
Holy Land Fund. We want to help people in the Holy Land. And you
Right.
donate to that, and they're giving that money right to Hamas
That's right.
in order to assist them and facilitate more terror attacks on Israel. So that in 1990s, the FBI was wiretapping meetings and sort of, figured out that this was going on. Were you a part of any of that when you were attached to the FBI?
Yeah, actually, post 9/11, it was eye-opening for me because I had never been full-time engaged in, the hunt for terrorists. And I think what we learned then is we call it homegrown, terrorism, and
Mhm.
not just Hamas. I mean, when you start looking at that time at Al Qaeda cells, but the real concerning, one to me is the Hezbollah presence because obviously they're state-sponsored, fully funded, and now they have entire communities that are supporting them. And so, not overstating the danger, but it's very, very problematic to have those that hate you, that have identified that you should be. When Iranians scream death to America, we should believe them. But now
Mhm.
they're inside of the U.S., and the problematic piece is, if you compare it to World War II and having Nazis inside of the US, they could launch attacks. But we had a very, very clear protocol for identifying them and where they are and the communities they lived in. The FBI did a pretty good job. Not so much now. And so the presence of Hamas is concerning. The presence of Hezbollah is concerning. We tend to think Al Qaeda's out of the mix. That's not true. And now
Mhm.
we have, open borders where we're not 100% sure what level of potential players coming across the border.
Yeah. But we
So,
know that they are. I mean, I've done a lot of
yeah,
reporting on that. We may not know the numbers, but we know for sure that they are coming in and attempting to come in. And not just Hamas, not just Hezbollah, not just Iran, but all of our adversaries and enemies are shipping people into the United States wholesale, even if it's just like Venezuela emptying its prisons and sending people up there because it's cheaper to send those people to the United States than to keep them in prison in Venezuela.
exactly
And
right.
so
Yeah.
we have all kinds. I mean, look, I've marched with the caravans many times, and it is nothing. You can, if you speak Spanish, within 5 minutes, you can find felons, convicted felons, who have been deported from the United States for violent felonies, who are on their way back to the United States with these caravans. So we know without a shadow of a doubt that there are tons of criminals coming into the United States doing that. When it comes to Hamas and Hezbollah, it seems like so far what they have contented themselves with is using the United States and weaponizing our generosity in order to fundraise to send money over here to their you know branches in Gaza and Lebanon and Iraq and places like that, and then use that money to facilitate terror in Israel. But what do you feel about? I mean, now that Hamas is getting their heads handed to them down in Gaza, Hezbollah is getting spanked up in the north, and they're obviously stirred up very much. They're. It's not that you can make them hate us any more than they already do, but they may feel like now they are. They're not going to have the strength or the capability to continue to foment terror against Israel as much, because Israel's on a very high war footing. But now the soft target is in the United States. What do you feel about that?
No, I think you're 100% correct. And I think we've got to remember, folks, this is not a disagreement politically. This is a fundamentally ideological hatred that really recognizes the U.S. as the great Satan, the enemy. And
Yeah.
so the focus of their efforts is going to be, hey, you're 100% right. They've traditionally used us for funding, which they're doing very well, but
Yeah.
they will soon begin to unleash more attacks. We thought initially, you and I talked about the Canadian thing, that was, a car bomb. And it turned out, the investigation's still underway, that maybe it wasn't. But I will tell you with certainty, we're going to see more of those focused attacks as the war in Gaza continues.
Right.
Why? Because it encourages the hatred that already exists. And in many cases, the
Right.
U.S. has been portrayed from the time they were kids as the
Mhm.
enemy. And
Yeah.
so now, they're here. They can impact us, from the inside much greater than they could had we had some level of border controls. So I think it's
Well, and
going to get interesting.
I think at some level this has kind of become the self-petting dog, in that
Hmm.
so we've seen since 9/11 a tremendous amount of Qatari money that
Right.
has come into the United States universities, specifically to change the thinking of our university students and make them friendlier to the Islamic world. Since the 9/11 attacks, Qatar has become the largest foreign donor to American academia. Between 2001 and 2021, Qatar donated $4.7 billion to US universities, with some funds not reported. So there may be more than that, right? Um, the donations coincided, as you have seen, with an increase in pro Palestinian activities and support among our college students, with the upshot being that now during this war, as uh, in contrast with after 2001, after 9/11, back then we saw the nation unite and want to take action against Al Qaeda and the Taliban. Now, what it's completely different. We've seen absolutely massive pro-Palestinian and violent pro-Palestinian marches on college campuses across the United States and in large cities across the U.S. And this, I think, and maybe you disagree, but what do you think? I think it's a direct result of Qatar specifically targeting U.S. universities to try to change how these kids think.
Yeah. And remember, Chuck, I mean, we've seen this playbook before in 1930s Germany. Propaganda is always based on a little bit of truth. But if you say the same thing over and over again, even though it's a lie, it becomes the truth. And all you have to do is
Yeah.
watch the interviews of some of the protesters. Hey, so you support the Palestinian cause? Great. So from the river to the sea, you support the annihilation of Israel. Oh, wait. So what's happened
Mm-hmm.
is the generations got caught way up in a propaganda campaign that, quite frankly, we're losing because they're looking for that higher cause to invest themselves in.
Right.
And because we've taken out, history, and we're not talking about, I mean, it's amazing to me. My father fought in World War II. He saw
Hmm.
firsthand what Hitler and the Japanese, trying to take over the world, and the power, and the massive devastation to human life. And
Hmm.
yet, the same methodologies that they use to control people, they're now trying here. And unfortunately, the colleges are the center of the podium. They're
Hmm.
even from, the professors. So I think it's so dangerous. And the other thing, Chuck, we're paying attention a lot to the Islamic issue. We're not paying attention to the Chinese issue. And there's a subtle
Right.
effort by the Chinese as well. And so, America is in very, very challenging times. And, I think you and I've talked about this many times. It's time for people that love our country to stand up, to get prepared, and to pray, especially the pray
Hmm.
part, because I think that there's
Yeah.
nothing that humans can do. We need a refreshment from the Lord, and revival's still possible. Obviously, God can do what He wants to do, but the dangers that we're seeing are increasing every day.
Well, I just wonder, as young people, um, just are not being taught how to think correctly about this stuff. They're being told what to think, and rather than taught how to think when they go to
Hmm.
college. And so I've been actually working with this new YouTube channel called the Restless Channel, and they
Oh,
have like
cool.
a new news uh, kind of section of that called the Patriot Estate, like the fourth estate for patriots, where I'm giving these updates about what's going on here in Israel, but kind of giving them in a simpler, more straightforward format aimed at college kids to try to help them better understand what's going on in Israel and why it's important to them. And
Hmm.
so, if I would recommend, if anybody has college kids in your family, or if you've got young people, or if you want to see more of my reporting, go over to the Restless channel on YouTube and look up the Patriot Estate, and you can see more of my reporting over there. I will post links to that on my own locals page. You can go to chuckholton.com now, and it will redirect you to chuckholton.locals.com, and you can subscribe over there to get notified when I post things, my books, my movies, my documentaries, and all the other reporting that I do, not just for CBN or Newsmax, but for these other sort of second tier news agencies, that sort of thing. And so you can keep up on everything I'm doing over there at chuckholton.com. Tim, how can people find you again?
Yeah, so we're at Lionheart Protection Strategies on YouTube, or at
Mhm.
Lionheart Skills. Let
Okay.
me just encourage, just based on what you said, Chuck, it's so important that the truth is told. Obviously, the truth of the gospel is the most important thing, but the truth of American history, what we have stood for, that's been lost. And
Hmm.
my father would get teary having sat on a carrier off of Okinawa, and kamikazes coming in and people being blown apart, all because freedom mattered to the US and we stood strong against tyranny. And so I think, I encourage every person. I'm starting to get a lot of emails from older people, and they're saying, well, what
Hmm.
can we do? Well, number one, you prepare, but number two, you tell the truth of your experience. You share
Yeah.
with young people, and everybody's afraid now. Nobody wants to offend. And there's some really good practical things too. I have a new friend, Matt Pasqualini, and he does. If you check out his YouTube, he actually does self defense training for older people, how to
Mm.
utilize canes, and how to think tactically, and how important movement is.
Very
So I
interesting.
would just think, yeah, it's really cool, and he's a great guy. He's a great believer. But I think that the takeaway is, wherever we go, we need to be alert and aware, not fearful. Let me stress that again.
Hmm.
We believers should not live in fear. We should live in wisdom and preparation, and that always requires action. If you're wise, you do certain things. And I think
Right.
that's where we are. And brother, I'm so grateful that you just keep telling the truth. That's why I'm honored every time you call me. You keep
Mm.
putting the truth out there, because the truth will always dominate lies.
That's
And
what I've
and
been
the
telling the
problem,
IDF for a long time.
yeah.
I actually had discussion today with a lawyer that was going up to the Knesset, and he was telling me, he started telling me, I'm trying to tell these guys that they're losing the information war because they're not letting,
That's right.
and I was like, that's what I've been saying for all this. And he said, oh, and here, tell you what, make a video and I'll show it to the guys at the Knesset. So he filmed me going, guys, you are losing the information war because you are holding on too tightly to the truth. You have a righteous cause here, and that righteous cause will help you. Uh, will help you if you allow a third party to corroborate what you're saying on the ground. But by holding on too tightly to what you're doing, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot in the information battle space. And so you're right. The truth needs to get out. And when it's allowed to get out, it sets people free. And that's just so important in every aspect of life. I want to ask one more thing about the whole terror issue, and that
Hmm.
is, in today's environment in the United States, we've seen so many of these uh, protests going on all around the country. And I've seen these really unfortunate videos where some elderly folks or whatever are driving along, and they come around a corner and they find themselves right in the middle of one of these violent protests. People start beating up their car. People start trying to rip them out of the car. Um, what happens if you're driving along and all of a sudden you find yourself in something like that? Uh, what's your advice?
Well, we did a podcast on a lady that happened to, and they started
Mm,
beating the car, and the lady tried to get out of the car. Fortunately, they weren't overly violent. They just beat her car to death, and she was trying to
mhm,
reason with them, and it was obviously that she was responding in fear and shock. And so
mhm.
I always encourage folks that if you see, I mean, because it's not like you're just there, poof, it happens. If you see it, do an emergency U turn, turn right, turn left, get out of there. Because, Chuck, you've experienced, I was horrified as I watched your video after the election. You found yourself in a violent crowd. And the problem
Mhm.
is, if you're not with them, you are the enemy. And
That's
they're
right.
anonymous mostly because they're wearing masks, they're not
Mhm,
afraid, and
mhm.
they know that there's likely not going to be
Right.
any accounting for what they do.
Yeah, that mob
So
mentality takes over and they will do
it does.
anything. That mob mentality is so dangerous because when people get in a mob, they lose all inhibitions and they do things that they would never even consider doing in their right minds. And I had a guy come after me with a hammer at that protest on
I remember
Inauguration
that.
Day in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. While I was broadcasting live, a guy tried to grab my phone and came after me with a hammer. Had another guy come after me with his camera tripod and had
Yeah.
a whole bunch of people throwing rocks and bottles and stuff. And that's just one of many of those. I spent a whole year going to all those protests with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and stuff around the world. And I tell you what, I hope I never have to go to another one of those again. That talk
Yeah.
about breaking all five rules is stupid, man.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, I watched your video and you were masterful because you did something that a lot of people don't think about. You began to say, "Oh, wait, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Hmm.
Whoa. What are you doing? We're different." I remember that. And I thought, God forbid if you found yourself in the middle, that may be an option. Simply saying, "I'm
Hmm.
here to, to help and
Yeah,
record." Now, I know that
that's
some
called
believe
verbal
you and
judo.
some didn't. Yeah,
That's
that's
called verbal
exactly
judo.
which is a huge skill. If
Yeah.
if you can talk to somebody and de-escalate violence, I learned that as a
Hmm.
police officer.
Hmm.
Talking is much better than fighting. If you can get
Hmm.
people to cooperate because you're doing things with dignity and you're having conversations, that's huge. But yeah, if you find yourself in a crowd, you're quickly in a
Yeah, get
no-win
out,
situation.
get
You got
out,
to
get
go.
out. Right, right.
Even if it's you see it, you can't get out for traffic. Leave your car, go into a store. Don't get caught in the, I'd rather lose a car than
Yeah.
lose my life. And
That's why they
unfortunately,
make
these
insurance.
protests, yeah, they're getting more and more violent too,
Yeah.
without charges. And I'm amazed at what's happened in terms of the tolerance for violence
Sure.
against
There's
innocent
very
people.
little to deter them anymore because, like you
Right.
say, they're not. they're not prosecuting people who are violent for the most part, and so they feel like they can get away with it and do whatever they want, especially since they're,
Yeah.
like you say, they're all dressed the same and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, very, very concerning times in the United States. I, I just want to ask you all to do me a favor. I really appreciate you being on on here. Somebody's saying don't go into a building. I'm not sure why he's saying don't go into a building. Would there be a reason not to go into a building?
Yeah, there would be if the crowd was following you into the building. I think that's the point. But my point to going into the building is reminding people we don't think that there's a back exit to every store. That's where they
Mhm.
get their cargo. That's where. So
Yeah.
if you have to go into the store and exit out the back. Now, if it's a trapped
I have done
environment,
that. I've actually
yeah,
done that. We got into a crazy situation in Cartagena one time, and we went in the front of a restaurant, and the crowd was like waiting for us outside the restaurant, and there was no way we were gonna get through them, and so we just went out the back door, and they
perfect.
chased us.
Yeah,
They came around the building, but we were able to jump in a taxi and peel out before they got to us. So that actually works. Hey, so what I was about to ask is, there's 1,900 people online right now. Do me a big favor and hit that like button. Just take a second. You won't miss anything. Go down and hit that like button because it really helps with the algorithm for YouTube to show this podcast to a lot more people. And what we're talking about here could literally save somebody's life. And so it'd be super helpful for me if you just go hit that white thumbs up button, like Ronnie and Jeff are asking you to do over and over again in the comments. I appreciate you two. I need to buy you guys a coffee or something. I really appreciate the people that are really committed to try to help this thing get out to more people. So thank you very much for that. Like I said, you can follow Tim on his podcast here on YouTube, and I highly recommend you do that. We're over 1,000 likes now. That's great. Tim, again, tell people where they can find you.
Lionheart Protection Strategies on YouTube, and
Uh-huh.
it's at Lionheart Skills on Twitter. So
Uh,
either there, and then our website is lionheartsecurityteam.com. You can see the group of folks that kind of do what we do in terms of protecting folks and training and all that kind of stuff.
I'm watching the comments here by this guy Fuzzger Snabble on the comments. He's saying he's trying to push this stuff in his men's group. Men need to know how to address these things. Hey, man, talk to us. Get a hold of me at hotzoneholton@gmail.com. Or you can try to get a hold of Tim as well. He can let you know how to do that. And you can set it up so that we can come and do a training for your men's group. We've done that for churches all over the country. Tim and I have gone together and have done training seminars where we'll bring a $70,000 laser range trainer called Milo Range Training Systems, and we'll set that thing up and we'll run your guys through it, run your church security team through it, and try to help your church be able to secure themselves and the men of your church be better at protecting their families. That'd be a great thing to do for some kind of men's retreat or something like that. If you'd like to set that up, we do those all the time. Tim is traveling all over the United States doing trainings like that. Tell them about the last couple that that you've done and what you have coming up in the future.
Yeah, so we've got we're pretty busy. I think I'm out every weekend or week in January, February, March, and April. My wife's loving that, by the way. But
Mhm.
we're training churches. We trained a big mega church in Beaufort, South Carolina last weekend. Fantastic team, and I love it because their pastoral leadership was just saying, "Hey, we don't want to live in fear, but we definitely want to be prepared with skill." So we trained
Mhm.
firearms. We trained medical trauma
Mhm.
training. We train mental health awareness, and we train some, levels of de-escalation, and then of course the
Mhm.
Milo range. And the Milo
Right.
range is a virtual environment where people. It's not just about shooting. You're dealing with that homeless person. You're
Yeah,
dealing
that's the
all the
amazing
skills
thing
we just
about the
talked about.
Milo system. That Milo
Yeah,
system is so technically advanced. It actually watches you and listens to you and changes
yeah,
the environment based on what you do, which is amazing. And it is some of the
yeah.
best
It's
training I've
cool.
ever had. And it doesn't take any ammunition. You can do it inside in your auditorium or wherever. And it's really, really good stuff. I highly recommend it. And I keep trying to get one for my house, but I don't have that kind of money. But one of these days, I'm going to put one up in my basement and just leave it there because that'd be a whole lot more fun than watching Frasier or something. So uh, you guys are great. So Tim, do you have Twitter as well?
I do, yeah, at Lionheart Skills,
At
protection
Lionheart
skills. I'm
Skills
sorry.
on
Yeah,
Lionheart Protection Skills on Twitter.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So you um, do this consulting, and you've been to my church. I've been with you to some of the biggest churches in America. So little churches, big churches, doesn't matter. And schools, corporations, all that sort of thing. What is the number one question you're getting from people about their personal security nowadays? What are people concerned about as you go around the country talking about making their family safer?
Well, I just trained a corporation that is about 2 blocks from the White House week before last, and they were just overwhelmed with how quickly the crime situation in Washington is deteriorating. And what
Mm-hmm.
used to be normal, walking from the metro, getting to the building, going to parking garages, now has become very problematic. And so again, I don't preach fear, but you've got to have skill. The number one thing you got to do if you really want to be safer is put your phone
Mm-hmm.
away when you're out in public.
Mm-hmm.
Have a situational awareness mindset, which is that's kind of what we try to do. With the video interaction that we do on the channel is just talk about, hey, what would we do here? But they're
Yeah.
concerned, and it's interesting because it's not based on political party. Everybody is seeing the decline of safety and security, and especially in DC, where they just had in essence Lafayette Park and the massive anti-war protests there, and this is 2 blocks from there. So they're
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that the country we grew up in, and this is across corporations and across schools.
Yeah.
After Covenant, we have been really busy, trying to help schools protect themselves. And so I guess the takeaway for all of us is that we all need to have a plan. We need to be preparing now. If you go on the last podcast, I met with Dave Adler, who talked about, hey, what every family should be thinking about, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of water, food, but also fire and weather. And it's just time for people to wake up and say, things are changing, and I don't want to be behind this curve. I want to be ahead of it. I want to be wise. I want to be able to help others too,
Yeah.
especially for believers. And Chuck, I know you and I've talked about this. I don't want enough food for my family. I want enough food where I might be able to help others because, this life is short, and serving others,
Mm-hmm.
we know the rest of this story. We know what's coming as believers.
Mm-hmm.
So we ought to be the ones willing to prepare, willing to lead, willing to sacrifice so that others can be safe.
I agree. I agree. Well, that's great. I've got more reporting to do tonight, so I'm going to have to run. But Tim, we'd like to end in prayer. So
Yeah.
why don't you pray for us? Would you?
Okay. Great. Father, thank you for your constant love in the midst of a very sometimes chaotic world. You are our strong tower. You're the one we run to. You are our hope, our strength, our protector. And so, Lord, we just thank you. We thank you that while we were sinners, that you died for us, and because of our relationship with you, there's no room for fear. That we know the rest of the story. And Father, I pray for every person that's listening right now. That Father, you know where they're hurting, you know where they need you. Maybe it's a financial need, maybe it's a relational need, maybe it's a health need. I just pray in Jesus' name, Lord, that you would comfort them, that you would remind them that they are precious to you. And Father, I do pray that as a body, that we would become wise and prepared for what you have said is coming in the days ahead. Thank you, Lord, that we don't have to worry that evil will overtake us because you have already overcome the world. And so it's in that faith, it's in that hope that we rest all of our lives. And so thank you for Chuck. I pray your protection over him. In Jesus' name, I pray that you would give him the ability to even see things he can't see so that he could report truth in this very, very critical time. And bless his family, bless Connie, and we ask this all in your mighty name. Amen.
Amen. All right. God bless you all. Thank you very much for being part of this live with almost 2,000 people online and 1,200 likes. So that's really good. Like I said, go and please subscribe to Tim's YouTube page. It would really help him out as well. And you'll get a lot out of it. He does all these little short trainings on there where he's breaking down a real life uh, deadly force incident, or some kind of emergency robbery, something like that. And you can learn a lot from watching those real life things and hearing his commentary about them and how to avoid being a victim. So I hope you'll go over there. God bless you. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you coming on with me.
Thank you, brother. It's always an honor. Stay safe over
So
there.
Merry Christmas, man. We'll see you.
Okay.